Jacobin's article titled "The Washington Riot Was a Defeat for the Far Right, Not a Triumph." The riot at the Capitol on Wednesday was a symptom of right-wing weakness, not power. The real danger isn't a MAGA coup, but a restoration of the neoliberal status quo that produced the nightmare of Trump and his minions. The gist is that, yes, the Republicans just lost. So this is like them whining about their loss. Ultimately, they're not in power anymore. And that what we really should be keeping an eye out on is people in the Democratic Party who can exploit this kind of shock doctrine moment to grow the police state, et cetera. So everyone's calling this fascism, the article says, but alarming as the scenes in Washington were, these events, in fact, represented a significant defeat for the far right. The riot and its quick repudiation by the political and economic elite made plain that there is currently little base in the state or among big capital for a Trumpist coup, despite the apparent and unnerving participation of police and security forces. Wednesday's violence was certainly disturbing, but with so much focus on the potential rise of fascism, we risk losing sight of the more immediate threat posed by a new president, backed by all the forces of the state and capital, strengthened by the riot, and determined to restore the neoliberal status quo ante.
Mm-hmm. Well, I mean, first, this is going to sound like a quibble, but I object that this is a big defeat for the right.
I agree with that.
Because this is an event that will be mythologized among the right unless there is an actual consequence, unless there's an actual repudiation, unless something happens to Trump that is not just being banned from TikTok or being symbolically impeached again. Because the message I see from the people who are desperate to impeach him again is, okay, well then, even if the Senate doesn't remove him from office, even if his term's already about to be up, then he'll be the first president to be impeached twice. And the response to that is, well, then he'll be the first president to beat impeachment twice.
Right. I want to come back to the impeachment conversation because there are a lot of questions in there. But to this point about, I think there's two things going on in this article. I think one is the sometimes big materialist brain that happens in segments of the left, where the much needed and under-discussed materialist argument in the mainstream gets elevated to the exclusion of really, I think, giving proper weight to the, in this case, racialized aspects of something that has gone down. And what ends up happening is, my feeling is that if you know the public is going to have this kind of reaction to this kind of analysis, you got to give a spoonful of sugar. Like, you got to do a lot more caveating in the way of talking about how this is a specific kind of racialized hatred that draws upon hundreds of years of American race war. And like, you got to put some of that. You can't just have a sentence or two being like, oh yeah, there were some Confederate flags, but like, don't worry, this isn't fascism. And I also think, to your point, Virgil, you can't ignore that this is a long-standing, simmering issue that isn't like gone because Trump's not in office anymore. Like, you can argue, and I think it's right to say, we should be extremely concerned about what Democrats and Joe Biden, Crime Bill Joe Biden, Patriot Act Joe Biden, is going to do with this moment where he's basically been given a lot of carte blanche to like nail these fascists. But I think you can do that without minimizing the consequence, the implications of what just happened.
If you want to dig deeper into this, so do you think what we saw was just white supremacist violence?
No, I don't. That's the thing. Like, I wish that they would frame these kinds of issues differently, because we need to be having a conversation that's both and not either or. So, for example, there's been a lot of discourse about how so many of the people in the crowd were relatively affluent.
Yeah.
And by the way, when we say relatively affluent, I mean, there's a lot of folks who are like, this person took a plane ride from California, so they're not poor. Like, it's like,
yeah,
okay.
these aren't the Mercers busting in there, but they are people who are like a real estate agent,
right,
or like a mid-level executive at a construction company,
right?
A number of cops in there as well, as it's come out.
Right. And it's a mixed bag, right? I'm sure that there was probably at least one millionaire in the crowd. But there's also probably a large number of people in the crowd who make $50,000 a year or less. I think it's a mixed crowd. I don't think you can draw weighty conclusions either way. You can't say, oh my gosh, this entire thing would be cured if everybody got $2,000 recurring checks. Sure. But you also can't say that there wasn't some cohort of the crowd that was clamoring for checks and talking about how Democrats have ruined the country and their lives because of their relative precarity. And you can't ignore the fact of diseases of despair and white decline and all of the things that are like true facts. And it's just as stupid to say this riot happened exclusively because racism, because obviously racism has always been a thing. Racism is like the founding principle of America. Like, obviously racism. But what the goal should be is try to figure out what the particular noxious mixture of crap is going on in this moment that creates this moment, and to try to tease it apart with more nuance, not try to say like this is validation that racism exists or this is validation that we need to have more economic equality. Like Dr. King is somewhere rolling in his grave about the idea that these are like competing factions of thought.
Yeah, there's no particular class character to the people who stormed the Capitol. They are, I would surmise they're overwhelmingly, white, overwhelmingly men. They're overwhelmingly suburbanites. And
Biden's people.
These are... Say again?
Biden's people.
And they are people who have been overwhelmingly whipped into a frenzy by two sources. One is you have the kind of the mainstream right, so like the Charlie Kirk right, like the Donald Trump right, and that is the mainstream of the right, absolutely. That has been, that has been using, violent imagery and militarized language, basically in order to just build mailing lists, in order to just raise money. Because like those guys, like the Charlie Kirk guys, the Donald Trump and the Lauren Boebert types, they don't give a shit about, actually stopping the steal or anything like that. They just want, names for a freaking mailing list. And then you have the more autonomous types, the militia types and the Proud Boy types, and the QAnon types who have essentially given themselves a derangement because of the nature of algorithmic social media discourse. It's like, a lot of people listening to this, I'm sure, have the experience of knowing a parent who is just like falling completely nuts about QAnon crap, about vaccine stuff, about COVID truth stuff, about 5G shit, because they watch YouTube videos. And that's enough to cause people to have enough of a break to fly to the Capitol.
Yeah, I think that's true. I mean, the argument that this Jacobin article is making as well is that Capitol doesn't back Trump or the kind of reactionary QAnon conspiracy theory types. And that part of the reason they're saying that this is a misdiagnosis of fascism is that there isn't the alignment between Capitol and the Trump folks. It's in fact all the people who are trying to get back to normal who are like, this is throwing off the stock market. Like, we need to get NASDAQ settled. Like, we don't need coup talk. Let's just get America back on pace. There isn't the alignment between the fascist, the coup crowds and Capitol. The realignment is back with the Romney traditional Republicans in Capitol, because that's the priority. And that we should be less concerned because, the powers that be, the financial backing isn't behind the folks who are storming the Capitol. I mean, and I want to tease that out a little bit. That's not to say, obviously, that it's not a terrible, scary, horrible thing that a bunch of hordes of people were feet away from zip tying all of our members of Congress and doing God knows what to them. Like, That's a separate issue that I think that we should be able to parse apart. But the question is, does this thing have like legs on it? And does it have the power to really overturn the government if Capitol isn't behind it?
Right. Well, again, obviously these people are violent sadists, and, let's not lose sight of that. Even if they are, even if they don't have a particular class character, even if they don't have particular demands, really, like they broke in there and they had no idea what the hell to do except, piss all over the place.
Yeah, they say, they make the point, quote, on Sunday, none other than Dick Cheney organized every living Secretary of Defense to sign a statement published in the Washington Post repudiating Trump and insisting the armed forces would not participate in efforts to overturn the election. Now, major business organizations have issued some of the harshest statements in their histories, rebuking Trump and calling for an end to the chaos of his presidency. The National Association of Manufacturers, which generally leans Republican, has been the strongest source of business support for Trump, called for Trump to be removed from office. Similarly, the larger and more powerful Business Roundtable also issued a strong condemnation and demanded Wednesday evening that Congress move ahead that night in declaring Biden the president-elect. BlackRock CEO Larry Fink and JP Morgan Chase CEO Jamie Dimon each issued their own condemnations, along with many others from a cross-section of American businesses.
I would say it's true that Capitol doesn't align with these people. Capitol doesn't align with the militia hicks storming the Capitol because Capitol doesn't need to align with those people. Because there's no communist threat where Capitol would align with a fascist, an atavistic right as the least worst option.
Yeah, right. That's the thing. And I think that if there's a critique here to be made, it's that, yeah, at present they don't align, but let's see what would happen if Bernie Sanders were somehow in the running to be president. And
Bernie Sanders is even the compromise, and he is still considered totally unacceptable beyond the pale.
Right. They were going to all align behind Bloomberg, another fascist, to take him down. And no one had any compunctions about that, including a lot of the same black writers who were very upset with this take. Right. So, they all lined up and were perfectly happy with don't stop and frisk all black people, all criminals. Same for Bloomberg. Those are the same mutual categories. But all black people / criminals look the same.
Yeah, so Capitol doesn't support a coup against Congress, the Congress that's, in their pockets. They don't support a coup in order to stop Joe Biden, the threat to the capitalist order. Joe Biden.
Right.
Because they don't need to. And it's also worth noting Capitol has been fine with Donald Trump for the past 4 years.
Right. They can ride a lot of different kinds of waves.